Hi and welcome back to the Sour Strawberry channel. I'm Sandy and today I'm making pumpkin spice sourdough bread in the shape of a pumpkin. Yep, I'm going to show you how to tie it up. First off, we're going to make the pumpkin pie spice. You're going to need 3 tablespoons of ground cinnamon, 2 teaspoons of ground ginger, 2 teaspoons of nutmeg, 1.5 teaspoons of ground allspice, and 1.5 teaspoons of ground cloves. And I just pop it all into a small jar. Next, we're going to start our bread. We are going to add 125 grams of active sourdough starter along with a 240 grams of warm water, and we're going to mix that until it's nicely mixed. I like to remove this from my scale when I do my mixing, and then I'm just taking my spatula and giving it a real good mix to make sure everything's blended. Next up, we are going to add 175 grams of pumpkin puree and then 500 grams of the bread flour. And again, combine all that together and adding our salt. That was 10 grams of coarse salt. And you want to mix this well enough that all of the flour has been moistened with the liquids in the mix. This starts out as quite a shaggy dough, so you want to ditch the spatula and get in there with your hands and make sure that all of that flour is incorporated and that it's moist. And then you want to cover it with a damp towel. Let the dough rest for about 30 minutes and then we're going to do some stretch and folds. I'm wetting my hand before I begin to help with the dough not sticking to me, hopefully. And I'm working my way around doing 4 stretch and folds, and we are going to repeat this in 30 minutes again, doing our second stretch and folds, and you'll see that the dough is starting to lighten up and it's getting a lot more stretchy and more pliable. And this time we are going to add our spices. So we're adding a tablespoon, and I wouldn't put any more in because this is pretty strong, of the pumpkin spice that we made just at the beginning of the video. Then we're going to continue with some extra stretch and folds, making sure that we're getting that spice incorporated as much as possible. And I even kind of push the dough around the edge of the bowl to pick up any of the spices stuck on the edge. Again, I'll let it rest for 30 minutes and we're going to do the final stretch and fold. And I'm wetting my hands again a little bit, making sure that we're incorporating as much of that spice as we can. So then we covered and let our dough bulk ferment for about 10 to 12 hours until it's about double in size. You can see some bubbles on the top. It's slightly domed and it doesn't stick to your fingers. Next, we want to prepare our banneton, and I am just adding my cover to mine. I'm going to add some brown rice flour so that my dough doesn't stick. And I'm just going to shake it around on the bottom and up the sides, and then set that aside, and we're going to shape our dough into a bowl. Okay, so I'm going to lightly flour my surface, spreading it out a little bit. Then I'm going to roll my dough out, and we're going to be adding the final ingredients. So we're going to stretch this out in, I don't know, 10 by 10, 12 by 12 inch kind of rectangle. Press it down a little bit, get some of those bubbles out of the way. Okay, and now we're going to add our brown sugar. I'm going to be using about 1/4 cup of the brown sugar, and as you can see, I'm sprinkling it across the surface of the dough, and then I'm going to push it down into it, spreading it out a little bit, trying to get it as even as possible. And then I'm going to fold up 1/3 on top of itself and add a little bit more of the sugar to that fold. And by adding it this way, you're going to get some nice ribbons in the finished product. Okay, so spreading that around and pushing it down so it stays in place, and the final little bit of sugar to this final spot. And then we are going to fold it again into thirds and flip it over and shape it into a bowl. Okay, and you want to do some tucks, moving the dough around and pushing the bottom underneath, adding tension. And it's a little bit sticky still, so I'm going to add a little bit more flour to the surface and also to my hands because the dough's sticking to my hands. You want to add as little flour as possible, but you still need to be able to work it up. Okay, a little bit more on my hands. So then we're going to do some twists and some pulls, And pulling this towards you, you're going to add some surface tension to the dough, which will help when we get to baking it. Next, I'm picking it up, placing it upside down into my banneton, and I'm stitching the bottom closed. I'm going to cover this with some saran wrap, and then I'm going to place it into a large plastic bag, and I'm going to stick it into the fridge to proof overnight. You can do 8 to 16 hours, depending on, your work schedule and when you can fit the bread in. Next, I'm going to get our bread ready to bake. So it's out of the fridge. I have some baker's twine, and I have some baker's twine cut and soaking in some olive oil. It helps for the release at the other end. We have some parchment paper, and some paper towel, because we're going to start by taking the string out of the olive oil, and you want to put it on the paper towel so that it wicks up any of the extra oil before we start. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your bread still in the bowl, and you're going to lay out your string in the pattern for as many panels as you would like for your bread. Okay, and you're crisscrossing them at the center. So I'm using 4 in total. Okay, and then I'm going to take my paper and I'm going to pop it on top. I'm going to flip this over, and we're going to remove the banneton, and I'm going to tie up my bread. So you want to get your strings stretched out so you know which ones are across from each other. And you're just going to work your way around, and you're going to tie up all of these strings. And first I'd add a little bit of rice flour. That will help when we're doing our scoring. Okay, and that's about as taut as you want this string to be. You don't want to pull on it so much that you've got an indent in the bread, because your bread's going to expand as it cooks in the oven, and you don't want the string actually cutting into the bread. You want it to just define the lines for the pumpkin shape. Okay, so cut off all the tails, and then I'm doing the final one. And now it's ready for scoring. And you want to work fast, because of course you want to do the scoring when it's cold. It's a lot easier to score, and you want to get this into the oven while it's still nice and cool so that you get a good spring. And so a simple pattern, I'm just going to do kind of a wheat pattern down each of these panels. But if you happen to notice in the picture at the beginning of this video, I actually cut a leaf into the top of each panel on that loaf that I made. The one at the beginning is white bread, and the one I'm going to show you at the end is actually this one done with the pumpkin spice and the pumpkin puree. So you're just working your way around to each of the panels, scoring your design in. Okay, and then as soon as you finish that, you're going to pop it into your oven and bake it. So I placed my Dutch oven into my oven and preheat for 450 for an hour. Then I put the bread in and covered for 35 minutes, uncovered for between 18 and 23 minutes.